Okay, well, good morning, ladies. Thanks for having me. Thanks for coming. I'm Rachel. I've done one of these presentations, so I don't know if y'all remember my face. I'm seeing some familiar faces, but happy to be here today to talk about all things diabetes. And again, I'm Rachel. I'm one of the dietitians with JTA Wellness. So this is just going to be kind of a general overview of diabetes, just kind of bringing some awareness to what it is, how prevalent it is, and then, of course, some solutions to help treat or even prevent diabetes. So, I have a feeling most of you, if not all of you, have a pretty good idea of what diabetes is. Maybe you've dealt with it yourself, or you know a family or friend that has. So, like I said, I know you probably know quite a bit already. So keep paying attention because I'm going to quiz you along the way on what you probably already know. And I'll try to keep it fun because I know diabetes can sometimes be a boring topic, but certainly something to be well aware of. And so I hope to bring some good information for y'all today. So let's just start with a little introduction. So diabetes mellitus, that's the official term for it. So DM is used for short by a lot of doctors and healthcare providers in their chart notes and whatnot. But diabetes mellitus is actually a rather complicated chronic inflammatory disease, but it really is quite simple in that it's really just classified by having abnormally high blood sugars, okay? And so blood sugar can be elevated by two main mechanisms, okay? So either the body does not produce enough insulin or cells do not respond to insulin, okay, which is known as insulin resistance. So my first quiz question for you guys, what is insulin? Anybody know? Anyone can give me an idea? I know y'all have heard of it before. So insulin is a hormone, okay? It's a hormone produced by our pancreas. And this hormone is really important. It is the hormone that helps our body regulate our levels of sugar in our blood. Okay, so the thing to remember about diabetes is really all about insulin. Okay, so we're going to be talking more and more about insulin here in a few slides. Okay, but before we do that, I just wanted to bring some awareness toward how prevalent diabetes is in our country. So this is, you can't even see the year very well, but this is a map of our country from 2004. So it's just kind of a graphic, okay? So we have colors here that represent, oops, sorry, I should have turned my notifications off. That'll go away. Okay, so the colors represent levels of obesity and diabetes by the county level, okay? So the lighter colors basically represent lower levels. The darker colors represent higher levels. So specifically, the dark purple represents that county has greater than 13% of obesity. And then the yellow, the county has greater than 13% of diabetes. The green, the dark green, greater than 13% of both obesity and diabetes. Okay, so 2004 doesn't look too bad, right? 6 years later, 2010, look how the colors change. It's crazy. So it's getting darker, more green, more purple, more yellow. And then another 6 years later, look how dark it is, right? Lots of color going on. So this is from 2016. So lots of the green, purple, yellow really covering our map of our country. So, you might hear a little bit about the statistics of diabetes, and it can be alarming just to hear the numbers, but I just feel like looking at the map and seeing the visual of just how prevalent it is can really put it in perspective. And this is about 8 years ago, right? So you can imagine how it's increased even further from then. So quite unfortunate. I'm not going to go into these numbers in too much detail here, just some more stats on diabetes in our country. And these statistics are from 2018 from the CDC. So in Texas, our rates are quite up there compared to the rest of the country. Estimated about 12.5% of our population has diabetes. And so we rank at a number 11th in the country. This isn't on the slide, but does anyone maybe have a guess as to which state in our country has the highest rates of diabetes? Anyone? Texas. We're 11th. Hawaii, maybe now. So this is back, these stats that I'm reporting are from 2018. Good guess. Mississippi, Alabama, in the South. Yeah, so I was surprised. I would have never guessed this state, but it's actually West Virginia. Yeah, West Virginia, sorry about that again. West Virginia, again, this is back in 2018, 16.2% of their population has diabetes. Any guesses what state has the lowest rate? You got it. I know. I was like, I'm not surprised by the Colorado. They're all climbing mountains over there, I guess, right? All right, so just some stats. And so in case I haven't depressed you enough, more stats about average years of life lost due to having diabetes. So this is just a chart kind of grouping people by their age and sex here. So just kind of to summarize here, you can kind of look at the numbers, and in the middle age group so anywhere from 18 to 64, it's estimated that people with diabetes lose an average of 5 to 8+ years of their life due to having or because they have diabetes. So not good. So why is diabetes so prevalent, right? And who is at particular risk? So we can kind of group risk factors of diabetes into two groups. So non-modifiable, meaning not a lot you can do about it, unfortunately, and then of course modifiable. So for non-modifiable, genetics, yes, there is a genetic component. You can't change your genes. There's some genes that can potentially put you at higher risk, family history, of course, age, our bodies aren't meant to last forever. The older we get, the more likely, obviously our body breaks down more, doesn't function as optimally, but especially with our metabolic health and our ability to regulate our blood sugar. So it's estimated in the middle age group, over 700,000 new cases in our country per year. I'm sorry about that. I don't even know how to turn that off. I'm not super tech savvy, so I apologize for that being a disruption. And then ethnic background. Unfortunately, people of Hispanic, African American descent do have just a higher risk. It's estimated that about half of these groups are predicted to potentially develop diabetes. So, okay, so well, a lot of things we can't control, but what can we control in our diet and our lifestyle to obviously reduce risk? So of course, if we manage our weight, unfortunately, and I know y'all probably know this, if you're overweight or obese, your risk for diabetes does increase. So we need to try to manage our weight what best we can, but it's not all about weight, right? We don't want to just be excessively sedentary. Obviously, we're going to talk about eating habits and managing how well we eat, but then also medications to be aware of that can potentially affect blood sugar. So some medications, so steroids for sure, right? Also like SSRIs, anxiety, depression medications, statins, beta blockers, and then apparently some asthma medications can affect blood sugar levels, either increasing them or even lowering them. So just some things to be aware of. So just some risk factors there. And so elevated blood sugar, like I said, it can happen through a couple different mechanisms, which really then classifies the different types of diabetes that we see. So I'm going to cover these few types in a bit, but before we go into the types of diabetes, let's just review how blood sugar is normally regulated. Okay, so we eat food, and food is then ultimately broken down in our body. Some of our food is broken down into glucose, glucose is sugar. I'll say blood sugar, blood glucose, that's the same thing, right? Glucose is the main sugar that circulates our bloodstream. And I was, another point, which I didn't plan on talking about this, but our blood glucose levels aren't purely and only affected by what we eat. Now, that's a big, big factor, but things like stress, our liver can produce sugar as well. So actually we do require a certain level of glucose in our bloodstream at all times. So, but food is a big factor in affecting our glucose in the bloodstream. So we eat food, food breaks down into glucose, that glucose goes into the bloodstream, okay? And then as our glucose levels rise in our blood, our pancreas is like, oh, there's a lot of sugar here. Let's pump out that insulin. So it gets, our pancreas is stimulated to release insulin, and that's the hormone, right, that I told you about. And that hormone, that insulin, it helps signal our body that, hey, there's sugar here. We need to use it. We need to get it out of the bloodstream. So it helps to move that glucose from the blood into our cells where it is supposed to be burned for energy, okay? So this is basically what's happening in our body, especially like right after we eat a meal, okay? So I don't know why I'm like getting out of breath, okay? Okay, so this is a simple analogy and like a visual to kind of understand this process, okay? So our cells, you can think of our cells as like the front door. The insulin is like the door key to open the door. And then the glucose is like the house guest trying to get into the door, okay? So that, again, so that insulin is the key, right? It is telling the cell, hey, we need to open the door. We got glucose coming in as the house guest, right? And so that's, just a basic kind of analogy, right? So that's what's normally happening at all times, okay? Especially with insulin. And let's talk about how this process can get disturbed and then lead to high blood sugar and different types of potentially diabetes. So starting with type 1, okay? Type 1 diabetes is actually considered an autoimmune disease, which I don't know if y'all are aware of that. We have a lot of different autoimmune diseases. Unfortunately, in type 1 is. So it's actually very different than type 2, which we'll talk about in a second, in that it is an autoimmune disease in which the pancreas, okay, the part of the pancreas that creates insulin is attacked by our own body. And over time, that pancreas really can become damaged, leading to very little or no insulin production. And this can be going on, so I'm going to mention here in a minute, it usually gets diagnosed early in life, but it still can take time to develop. That damage to the pancreas can take months or even years before symptoms appear or before, the organ becomes really damaged. But it does lead to permanent damage, unfortunately. There's not a whole lot that can be done to prevent it. And so, again, once the specific cells in the pancreas that are damaged, that produce that insulin, you don't have insulin, okay? So you have to take daily injections of insulin. So these diabetics absolutely need insulin for survival. And this is actually the less common form or less common type of diabetes. It's only about 5 to 10% of cases, and usually diagnosed earlier in life, okay? But it actually can develop later in life. It's not unheard of. In fact, my mother-in-law developed type 1 in her adulthood, so that was kind of weird. So it can happen, but usually children, will manifest early in life. But very easily, not easily, but very well managed by just proper medication. Proper dosing of insulin is really important. So there's usually really close care by the endocrinologist and the doctor and all that. And of course, regular blood sugar testing. Okay, but this is not the more common one. The more common one we hear about more is definitely type 2. Okay, so with type 2 diabetes, our cells are resisting the effects of the insulin. So it's resisting that key to open the door, to let sugar in. So cells resisting insulin, what is this called? What's the term? Have y'all heard? Insulin resistance, right? So, again, remember the analogy from before. The key can't open the door, so it's resistant to the key. So it's kind of like the keyhole is all gummed up, right? So the key's not working to open the door. So along with, what am I trying to say here? Oh, so along with insulin resistance, the pancreas, well, and actually as insulin resistance starting to develop, the pancreas is like, okay, well, sugar's still there. Let's come on, let's pump out more insulin, okay? And that just leads to more and more insulin resistance. And then the pancreas gets tired and it's like, all right, well, I'm just gonna stop producing insulin, or it just really kind of slows down its production because it's been producing so much. So you've got insulin resistance, it's not opening the door. Flooding with lots of insulin, that's not working. The pancreas really just slows down and then stops producing insulin. So you can actually have a combination of both mechanisms, low insulin and insulin resistance happening in type 2. Okay. So this is the more prevalent type of diabetes, 90 to 95% of all cases. And so, this happens over time. It's really very, like I said in the first slide, it's a chronic, meaning over time, inflammatory disease. So, it's important to be screened for, which we're going to talk about, but this also means that you might not know if your blood sugars are starting to rise or if you're having insulin resistance. Symptoms might not start to pop up until later, so they can appear slowly. But it's very manageable, and, we manage type 2 diabetes with dietary and lifestyle changes, in addition to potential medications, possibly insulin injections if it gets that severe, if it gets to that point. So for most cases, especially early on with being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, it's the goal to really try to manage blood sugar naturally. Just, okay, let's get healthy, let's watch what we eat, let's exercise, maybe before we rely on too much medication. So that's always the goal, right? But sometimes, especially depending on how severe it is, doctors will get patients on medications, and that can help in addition to diet and lifestyle changes. And then, if they're doing really good and blood sugar is being well managed, potentially medicines can be weaned off, or the dosages can certainly be reduced. So that's always a goal. Like when we have patients that are coming off diabetes medications, like that's a huge win, right? Okay, so that's type 2. Now, I'm not gonna talk a bunch about medications or anything, but of course we are gonna talk about dietary lifestyle changes more in a bit. Another form of diabetes, gestational diabetes. Have y'all heard of gestational diabetes? Do we have moms in the room? Yeah, do y'all remember being screened for it or having your blood sugar kind of tested? Yeah. So this is a form of diabetes. Blood sugar elevates during pregnancy. The key is that these women did not have diabetes prior, okay? So it purely develops in the pregnancy. So that's what distinguishes gestational. So it occurs in about 2 to 10% of all pregnancies. Usually this form of diabetes goes away after the delivery of the baby. However, women do have an increased risk of developing type 2 later on in life, especially if they're not following healthy habits. Let's see. Oh, and then I don't have it here, but babies also born of mothers of gestational diabetes have kind of an increased risk of obesity and diabetes in their life, which is kind of sad. But the good thing is it's always screened for and regular prenatal visits. So usually about 24 to 28 weeks of gestation, blood sugar levels tested, and usually there's a glucose tolerance test done, which we're going to talk about that a little bit too. So gestational. The last little type of diabetes that I want to talk about is pre-diabetes. So this is actually kind of a relatively newer classification of diabetes, especially as we've been screening more and more routinely for diabetes. Okay, so with pre-diabetes, blood glucose levels are elevated, but not high enough to really classify that full-on diabetes or type 2 diabetes diagnosis. And so because your sugar levels are kind of high, but not like that high, you really might not notice any symptoms of high blood sugar. So you really might not know you have it. So really important to be screened. And with anyone that's been told you're pre-diabetic, really might get discouraged. They might think they're just inevitably doomed to get the type 2 diabetes. That really isn't the case. At this stage, action is the best medicine. A lot of things that can be done to bring blood sugar down. Yeah.
Have they ever listed or linked RH factor to gestational diabetics?
I don't know the answer to that question. That's a good question. Have you heard something about that?
I was just wondering. Because
Yeah.
they usually test for RH.
RH.
So I was just wondering if it's ever been linked to or associated with gestational.
That's a cool question. I'll have to look because I'm sure that's been. Now, RH factor, remind me, I know what it is, but it's been a while.
It has to do with the blood type between the mother and the baby. And if it's RH positive and the baby comes out negative, then you have to have an injection for future children. Otherwise, it thinks the baby is an infection and it.
Oh, yeah.
So it has to do with.
Well, and genes, absolutely. That's a really interesting question. I can get back to y'all and do some digging. I'm not sure. Cool. Did you have something?
No.
Oh, you're helping. Okay. All right. So yeah, definitely at this stage, really making some diet lifestyle changes can help bring it back down and make a big impact. So, we really don't want people to get discouraged if they get this diagnosis. Okay, so those are the main types of diabetes I wanted to cover today. When blood sugar is not well managed, okay, remember I said diabetes is very manageable, but if it's not and our blood sugars are running chronically high, maybe we're not getting the proper medication, we're not doing the right things we should be doing, we really run the risk of a lot of things going wrong in the body. So that high blood sugar circulating our bloodstream can put a lot of pressure, a lot of inflammation on different organs and different parts of the body. So, this graphic just showing you some of the big things that can happen. So definitely on our cardiovascular system, our brain, our kidneys, especially remember our kidneys filter our blood. A lot of things, our nerves, our hands, our feet. Also, our body, can become compromised, and it can become a lot harder for us to fight off an infection or heal from an injury. So a lot of complications that can happen. Fortunately, like I said, it's very manageable. So a lot of these complications can be prevented. Someone that has diabetes doesn't have to assume they're going to get nerve damage in their feet or have to wear those socks, So it can be very manageable, but definitely complications and big motivators for people to manage their blood sugar. Did y'all notice cancer listed? So I thought that would be obviously of particular concern to y'all. Was anyone aware of the connection between diabetes and cancer? No? Yeah, so it's actually been studied quite a bit. And I think from what I understand and I've read, that it's still not quite clear just how diabetes can increase risk for cancer. But it could be a combination of factors. And of course, it probably varies case by case, type of cancer as well. And probably including how, you're having abnormal levels of insulin. Okay, so insulin promotes cell growth. Okay, so that can potentially be promoting a negative feedback loop that could potentially fuel growth of cancer cells. Also, hyperglycemia, high blood sugar, potentially fueling cancer cell growth too, because I'm sure y'all have heard cancer cells feed off glucose. Okay, so they love sugar, and they don't require insulin to take in that sugar. So, and then other comorbidities that come with diabetes all could be also contributing to cancer risk. Okay, so if you are someone or you know someone who's at risk for diabetes, Obviously, again, important to get screened, but it's also really good to be aware of the symptoms that can occur with high blood sugar. And that can be a few things here. So frequent urination is a big one, along with excessive thirst. When you have a lot of that sugar in your blood, your kidneys are working hard to filter it. You're going to the bathroom a lot, and that also makes you really thirsty. You can actually have some like big drop in weight, not in a healthy way, unexpected weight loss. Again, your wounds may not heal as quickly or as easily. Blurry vision, potentially, and fatigue is a big one. So remember, your cells are not receiving that glucose and that energy. So you can feel really tired, dry skin, numbness, tingling in hands and feet, and then again, frequent infections or having trouble getting over the colds and flus and things like that. Okay, so we've kind of gone through a lot of the concepts of diabetes, so let's look at the numbers. Okay, so these are the diagnostic criteria for diagnosing diabetes, looking at 3 different types of lab tests. So we have the hemoglobin A1C, the fasting blood glucose, and the glucose tolerance test. Okay, another quiz for y'all. Does anyone know what the A1C is? Have y'all heard of it? Anyone?
Measures your glucose level over several.
Yes, yes. And the way it does it, so it's a percentage of your hemoglobin. The hemoglobin's the protein in our blood cells that carry oxygen, but it's the percentage of the hemoglobin that becomes glycated, or meaning like sugar sticks to it. So it's the percentage of the hemoglobin molecules in our blood that have sugar. So it, like she said, it kind of represents how your blood sugar's been trending over the past 3 months or so. So it's very helpful to really gauge how your blood sugar's been doing, whereas the fasting blood sugar test is very important too, but it's only giving you what your sugar level is at that given time. Okay. So A1C, normal. I mean, it's normal that some of that hemoglobin is going to have sugar to it. So maybe 5%, 5.7% or less is normal. Okay. You're getting in the pre-diabetes range if your A1C is 5.7 to 6.4, and then diabetes 6.5 and above. And then fasting blood sugar, normal range it says 99, but it's actually about 70 to 99. If it's below 70, that's like, whoa, that's low blood sugar. Remember, we do actually require a certain level of glucose in our blood at all times. But 70 to 99, and then about 100 to 125 is prediabetes, and 126 or above is diabetes. So those are some numbers. And then the glucose tolerance test it's definitely used in pregnancy, not always used for diagnosing diabetes, but it is a good, useful test as well. So basically, the doctor has you consume like a glucose syrup and then test your blood at subsequent intervals, like 30, 60 minutes later, to see how your blood sugars rise and fall after taking that glucose in. Okay, so, people with diabetes become very quickly familiar with these numbers, especially if they are pricking their finger, testing their sugar levels on their own. And it is good for someone with diabetes to become familiar. There are people that have diabetes that have never gotten a meter, never tested it. They just rely on their doctor. But it's definitely a good idea. And of course, especially type 1s have to be testing their sugars. But even people with type 2, it's a good idea. But I've had clients actually that don't have diabetes that are just a little extra concerned. Maybe they have a family history, maybe they have other risk factors. Anyways, other people that don't have diabetes, that they go and buy a meter and some strips and they start testing and just to see how they're doing. Becoming aware of the numbers. So if you don't have diabetes, what we want to see is before eating or fasting, we want it to be, remember, that 70 to 99 or like less than 100 or so. And then after you've had a meal, about 1 to 2 hours later, blood sugar really shouldn't be going over 140, okay? So about 140 or less. Now, those with diabetes, of course, would still want to go see these nice ranges in the normal category, but we do give them a little bit more of a cushion because we expect numbers to be a little more elevated. So goals for diabetics when they're testing their blood sugar, 80 to 130 fasting, so first thing in the morning before eating, and then really after eating 1 to 2 hours later, we don't want to see it spike over 180. And that's the goal. You know, we have people come to us and they're like, their blood sugars are in the 200s, maybe 300s, but you know, we worked towards that goal, right, with medications and diet and everything else. And then I showed you the A1C levels on the last slide. Again, we want to see that A1C closer to that 5.7, but once people have diabetes and they're continuing to get their A1C checked, really just want to see it 7 or less, and they're doing a good job. Okay, so the next few slides, I'm just going to conclude to kind of go over some basic information on how we treat this and how we manage it, right? So even if you don't have diabetes, to keep our blood levels in check, what do we need to do? What are some things we got to do and pay attention to? Exercise, right? Yes. And eat well. So focus on food, pay attention to our choices. We're going to talk more about food here in a bit and how it affects our blood sugar. But we need to focus on food. We need to exercise. And then, of course, also getting adequate sleep and managing our stress levels. Really pretty equally important to food and exercise. High stress and lack of sleep can really affect blood sugar. It can cause stress hormones to be elevated, which thereby can cause more inflammation and higher blood sugar levels too. So this is important as well. And then, of course, if you are diabetic, taking the necessary medication as prescribed, you know, if it comes to that. And at JTA Wellness, food, exercise, stress, sleep, those are our 4 pillars of health and wellness we talk about all the time. But for today, I'm just going to kind of quickly cover diet and a little bit on exercise. So starting with some just nutrition 101 basics here. So food provides our body with necessary macro and micronutrients, okay? Macronutrients provide our body with calories and energy. And micronutrients our vitamins and minerals and things like that. Don't provide us with calories, but still very important for our health. Okay, so the macronutrients are carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Which of these 3 affects blood sugar?
Carbohydrates.
Got it, carbohydrates. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about all 3, but we're going to talk about carbs more so, because that is the one that affects our blood sugar the most, or primarily. And like I said, micronutrients, just as important, vitamins and minerals that our body requires. Deficiencies in certain nutrients here can make it harder to manage diabetes, can cause more inflammation. So these are important too, obviously, but I'm not going to dive into much detail there. We're going to talk more about our macronutrients. Okay, so true or false? All carbohydrate foods break down into glucose in the body. True or false?
No. False.
False? It's actually true. Yes. Yeah. I know. What about the healthy carbs? So we're going to talk about that for sure. So yes, all carbohydrates do affect blood glucose. They all get broken down into glucose. Okay, so we're going to go through a quick biochemistry lesson. So this is a quick visual of the different types of saccharides. Okay, saccharide is the kind of the scientific name for sugar or carbohydrate. Okay, that's synonymous. So monosaccharides are the simplest form of sugar. So mono meaning one. So this is a one sugar molecule. This is what glucose is. It's a one sugar molecule. It's a monosaccharide. We have other monosaccharides, fructose and galactose. These can also be converted in our body to glucose. So really glucose is our main one that our body uses ultimately for energy production. So that's monosaccharides, and then disaccharides, di meaning two. So disaccharides are made up of two sugar molecules. So these are, lactose. This is another name for sucrose, which is table sugar, and then maltose. So these come from more simple carb foods, like milk has lactose, and then sucrose, so fruits, sweets, anything with sugar. So these are more of our simple carbohydrates, simple meaning they are only made up of two little sugar molecules. And all of the different types of disaccharides do have glucose in there, okay? So sorry about that. And then the polysaccharides, these are more complex, okay? These are long chains of really complex, long, some of them are bigger, some of them are smaller, chains of glucose molecules all attached to each other, okay? So this is what makes up all of the other carbohydrate foods, all of the starches and grains and potatoes and such like that, okay? So when we eat this, like let's say we eat a bowl of pasta, it's gonna have lots of these chains making up that pasta, that starch in the pasta, and our body will just ultimately break all those bonds down, releasing all those individual molecules of glucose in our body. Okay, so let's talk about the foods that give us these dietary carbohydrates in the form of either those smaller saccharides or those polysaccharides. Okay, so and again, ultimately, all the foods that do ultimately break down into glucose, affecting our glucose levels. So carbs can be broken down into kind of like these four main groups. You've got starches and grains, fruit, milk, and sweets, anything with sugar. So starches and grains, this is just a quick list. It doesn't include everything, right? But any kind of grain, so rice, pasta, wheat, based products, breads, cereal, oatmeal, all those things, right? And then starchy vegetables, potatoes, corn, and peas are the major ones. And beans and lentils are also starchy, a starchy plant food. And then fruit, okay, so all fruit, right, has natural sugar in it. Okay, so all fruit has sugar, and all fruit will affect blood sugar. It's a healthy type of carbohydrate. It's got a lot of vitamins and nutrients, but yes, it is a form of natural sugar. A lot of times people come to me and they're like, oh, I only eat this fruit, but I avoid bananas and this other fruit because they have a lot of sugar. And I'm like, all fruit has sugar. So sometimes people don't make that connection. And well, we don't need to get in the details, but some fruit, we call a vegetable like tomatoes, for example, right? But some of the vegetables that are botanically a fruit have some of the natural sugars, but are a lot lower than, say, an apple, our sweet fruits, okay? But essentially, fruits, some of our vegetables, especially starchy vegetables, carbs, fruit juice, of course, milk. So were y'all aware that milk is a source of carbohydrates? Yeah, it's because of that lactose, so it has that milk sugar. Now, milk and dairy products can vary on their nutrient content, their carb content, but we're just talking about your regular lactose-containing cow's milk. Doesn't matter if it's skim or whole. That's just affecting the fat content. So skim milk, whole milk, all has the same amount of carbs. And then yogurt, yogurt will too. And then sweets, so, obviously, right? Desserts, candy, pastries, all the things. Soda, sugar sweetened beverages, which is what the SSB stands for. And of course, even honey. Some people are like, oh, I use honey. I'm like, that's great. Honey's natural, but it is still sugar. Sugar, right? Sugar itself. Okay, so those are our carbs, right? All ultimately breaking down into glucose in the body. Now, they all break down to glucose. However, some carbs are inherently healthier than others. And some certain carbohydrates will spike our blood sugar levels higher and quicker than others, okay? So this is just what this graph is illustrating, okay? So the red curve represents kind of what happens to your blood sugar after you eat something really sugary, especially with the simple sugar. Like let's say you down a 20-ounce Coke. Okay, this is what's going to happen. It's going to spike up and then kind of crash back down. The yellows, like if you were to eat more refined carbohydrates, maybe a couple slices of white toast or a bowl of white rice. Okay, so that also might spike you kind of high. Not as high as the sugar, right, but pretty high. And both of these are kind of, it's estimated we're likely getting that spiked kind of high out of that healthy range, potentially, right, which is what's here in the green. Now the blue line represents us when we might eat some of those healthier carbohydrates, more complex as we call them. They're more complex. They have larger chains of glucose to break down. So it takes longer to break down that sugar. So therefore that your blood sugar is not going up right away. It takes longer. See, it's going, time's elapsing here. So it's taking longer to spike up. And it usually doesn't spike quite as high either. So this is eating complex carbs. This is whole grains, like quinoa, brown rice, whole, nice and multi-grain bread, fruits and veggies, and beans and legumes, things like that. These are our complex carbs. So, diabetics often come to us and like, well, I can't eat any carbs. I'm like, yes, you can. And you still do need to eat carbs. Carbs provide our body with energy, but they also supply our body with lots of other nutrients that we need. It's about getting the right carbs. And also when we balance these good carbs along with some protein and fat as a part of a balanced meal, that's going to help kind of slow that spike even further and help with our blood sugar control even better. Yes.
What about gluten-free? Does that make a difference in how much that spikes?
Yeah, so some of your gluten-free products are sometimes made with some more other refined carbohydrates or refined flours that can potentially be almost just as kind of almost spike you just as much as a regular white bread. So just kind of being aware and careful. So if a gluten-free bread's made from just white rice flour, that it's gonna be more of a simple flour. More of a refined flour and more of a simple carb. So still, even if you're gluten-free, we want the more whole grains. And the reason, like I said, it's more of the branches, more of the things to break down, but also whole grains and these complex carbs also contain a lot of dietary fiber. Okay, and fiber is technically a type of carbohydrate, but it doesn't really contain as much glucose, and we don't break down fiber like we do the regular starch. So fiber actually doesn't spike our blood sugar. It slows digestion, right? It keeps us full. So that's another way that our blood sugar isn't spiking as much from those fibrous complex carbs, if that makes sense. So yeah, even with gluten-free products, if you can look for products that are made from like brown rice flour, quinoa, like other types of like whole grains and fiber-rich flours and ingredients. That's what you want to look for. So that's a great question though, because
My daughter's gluten-free.
Yeah.
She gets any of it. It's like,
She's celiac or just intolerant?
she's been tested for celiac
Mhm.
and it doesn't come back, but it shows markers for it. But she has been off of it for so long that if she gets any of it, she gets deathly ill.
Wow, yeah, it's not fun. But fortunately nowadays there's a lot of gluten-free options.
The thing is, you have to look for it in everything.
Yes, if she's that sensitive, yeah, gluten is a whole nother topic. But yes, it's in a lot of products. Yeah, so does this help? Does this kind of make sense what I'm trying to say? Okay, all right. Okay, so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about with carbs. Let's just talk a little bit about the other macronutrients, fats. Okay, so it isn't, fat doesn't immediately affect our blood sugar. It doesn't get broken down directly into glucose. But it's important to pay attention to our dietary fat because when you have diabetes, you're at an increased risk for heart disease, okay? And managing your intake of dietary fat can definitely help keep your heart healthy. So very important to do that. And to do that, we just want to be choosing more of those heart healthy anti-inflammatory fats, which are monounsaturated fats and polyunsaturated fats. And these are actually like listed on the nutrition facts label if you've ever noticed. But sources of these types of good fats are going to be healthy foods like nuts and seeds, fatty fish, and other certain seafood has a lot of these good fats, olive oil, and some other types of good oils, avocados, things like that. So I want to eat more of those fats and less of the pro-inflammatory fats, which come from trans fats and saturated fats. You're not going to avoid all saturated fat. A little bit in your diet is okay. Just don't want it to be too excessive. So trans and saturated fats come from hydrogenated oils, which are used a lot in processed foods, fried foods, and then fatty cuts of meat, full-fat dairy. Okay, so really trying to limit that. Eat more of those good fats to keep our heart healthy. And then our last macronutrient, of course, is protein. So pure protein foods will not affect your blood sugar. However, I just wanted to bring up many protein foods, especially plant-based protein foods, also contain carbohydrates. So just to be aware of that. So protein, I think y'all know what protein comes from, right? All of our meats and animal foods, cheese and eggs. Nuts and seeds are a good source of that healthy fat, but they also carry some protein as well, tofu. And then milk, beans, lentils, soybeans. Some of those protein foods are foods to be aware that also contain carbohydrates. So a lot of my vegan vegetarian clients, and especially those that maybe are having high blood sugar, diabetes, we have to talk about, okay, we can get the protein from plants, but we got to be careful, right? Because they also carry a lot of carbs, sorry. The good news is that our plant-based proteins, they do have carbs, but they have a lot of the good carbs, right? A lot of fiber, very complex, very healthy. So they're not going to be spiking them too high. Okay, exercise. So last, certainly not least, we can't forget about the exercise. So I have some dark humor for you here. So doctor says, what fits your busy schedule better, exercising 1 hour a day or being dead 24 hours a day? So it's like really harsh, right? But there is wisdom to that, and I think it's better explained by this quote by Edward Stanley. I like this quote a lot. So those who think that they do not have time for exercise will sooner or later have to find time for illness. And really that's the reality, and it just kind of highlights the importance of exercise for our health, especially with diabetes, because exercise is literally the best medicine, diabetes medicine. I mean, if I can't change someone's diet, if I can just get them moving, it's going to have a huge impact on their blood sugar. Okay, so we're not going to dive a whole lot into exercise, but I did want to just kind of highlight this. So this is just a visual again of what's happening, what we went through today, what we reviewed, how food is digested, it's broken down to sugar, goes into the bloodstream, which is then going into our cell. But if again, if we're not responding to insulin or we don't have enough insulin, our sugar remains high. However, when we're exercising, okay, glucose can get into our muscle cells without insulin. Okay, so that's really, really cool. So we don't, if we're resistant to insulin or we're not producing enough insulin, the moment we start really moving and using those muscles, that glucose can start being utilized and come out of our blood. So it can have this really amazing therapeutic effect to bring down our blood sugar. So again, just like really the best medicine for diabetes. All right, that's kind of what I had for y'all today. As y'all have heard, we are here to help, and we'd love to get you or any of your other friends in ThriveWell on our schedule. If you wanted to schedule an appointment with us, we're a network with most insurance policies. We have other dietitians. I think we have 9 dietitians now. I think y'all have got to meet some of us, and we'd be happy to meet with y'all. I did leave our contact information in case you don't already have it. But yeah, that's kind of what I had for y'all today. So what questions, comments, concerns, anything else that y'all had?